Hi, this is Alan Mackay and welcome to video 3. So this is really exciting. I want to knock this out really quick because this is late at night here and I'm trying to get this video to you as fast as I can. So this video is going to be all about destruction. Initially we're going to go through and cover a bit about optimizing. We're going to get our simulations and get them to be really quick. I actually got mine from being about 7 hours all the way down to being about 25 minutes in total. So that's a good start right there. On top of that, we're going to be talking about secondary effects, so creating a lot of additional debris and other things like that. But basically in video 1, we covered initially getting all the destruction kind of set up, all the dynamics, that sort of thing. But then we went further in video 2 into creating the beam effects and blocking out a lot of effects related to that. Then once the beams were created, we could loop back around and do the final destruction of the building based on the fact that we have the beams hitting it, choreographing it all, setting it all up. Now we're going to create the explosions and pyro and really turn it up. One thing I've thought about doing is maybe doing a Facebook Live session, so a live class with you guys to interact with you and answer your questions, as well as show you some additional techniques. So if this is something that you're interested in, let me know. I'll make sure to publish a link to my Facebook too, so you can keep an eye out for that as well, because I'll have replays of previous Facebook Lives and other tutorials and training that I've posted on there. So it might be good to keep an eye out for that as well. So feel free to follow me or do whatever you want there. But I'll definitely keep this in mind about building out some additional ideas on how we can improve on what we're already doing, and maybe do like a live class around that. And either you can join in the class and ask questions, or you can watch the replay later on if you're in a different time zone or whatever. But click the Facebook link below and feel free to join up if you want. But I'm really excited for this lesson. We're going to do a lot in here and I'm really excited for this. So again, stick with the training and let's continue to move forward. Okay, so at this point, we've been going through a lot, and it's been a long journey. Typically, I don't spend this much time on choreographing the destruction, but I kind of feel like in this case, we needed to do the initial destruction, then do the beam, and then do more destruction based on the beam. So right now, what we have looks pretty similar to this. We have everything rising up, and then we have that beam shoot down, and we see all that residual kind of destruction that happens there, which looks pretty cool. And we're trying to load up some other previews. I think this is from a different angle. Same deal. So I mean, I kind of like the idea of having all of this kind of continue to break away. But now that we've kind of got everything to that point, I want to push it further, and I want to get something that's more along the lines of this, where once that beam shoots down, we completely destroy areas of the building. And I think that's ultimately, the next step is to really destroy everything. So at this point, we're going to just spend a little bit more time on the destruction, and then we'll have it entirely locked down, and we'll be able to move on from there. At the same time, I want to talk about optimizing, because right now I'm guessing things are getting a little bit slow for you. And I want to talk about ways that we can speed all of that up. Okay, so let's just take a look at this for a minute, and I'm going to turn off my cache. So just dealing with what we have here. And what I want to look at is a couple of things. There's actually a lot I want to kind of quickly cover in here. One thing is, let's just turn on particle cull, so that way it's a little bit slower. And the particle cull, let's just kill let's kill the floor and the walls, but we'll keep everything else on. So right now we're just dealing with that one layer of the roof. But initially it's breaking, it's dynamic, there's a lot of stuff going on. And as this is all happening, I did actually turn this off for a second, but we have, we see the bounding box. I actually turned this stuff off just because in the viewport it still considers things that are being drawn as objects. So outer beam shape, I'm just turning a few of these back so we can see them. Anyway, so as this is growing, it's getting slower, slower, slower. So I want to introduce you guys to the analyzer. And the analyzer allows us to see what the heck is going on. So to access the analyzer, just click analyzer and it should pop up. If it doesn't, it's somewhere on your screen, probably like, looking like that or something. So this is the analyzer, and I've talked about this before, but the analyzer allows you to have a lot of information, basically see what is going on under the hood. So you don't necessarily need all this information, but at times it might be useful, because you could look at this and say, okay, where is most of this stuff happening? Where is a lot of time being wasted? So for instance, and I'm going to talk about this in a moment, is that the roof AB pass is one of these. The SC pass is one of these. The import geo is one of these. Okay, so these are ones that are taking a lot of time as this gets processed. So if we play through this, we can see in real time everything that TP is doing under the hood. Okay, so we can see where memory particles, where anything is being accessed, or just essentially where a lot of this is going to get heavy. Okay, so naturally, wherever things are fragmenting, wherever there's dynamics being calculated, those are definitely things that will take up a lot of time. At the same time, any loops where you're doing P-pass ABs or P-searches, where they're constantly comparing attributes from one particle system with another and comparing each individual ID back and forth around each other, that sort of thing can get pretty heavy as well. So bit by bit, you can kind of zone in on like what is taking time. The P-pass AB, not really much. The in-mesh, which I'm going to get into, is. And for instance, down here, we could look at, okay, the volume breaker is taking time. But again, it's fracturing geometry. I would imagine that, that would take up time. But we can start to see like where things get heavy, and we can start to optimize things based on that. Okay, so anyway, I thought I'd bring this up. Like I said, just for instance, we can look at a lot of this and essentially just kind of get a better idea of like what's going on, like how many particles we have, where they are in any specific groups. And that way also when you're testing stuff, you can see whether things are transferring from one to the next and so forth. So it gets very in-depth, and you're not going to use this all the time, but in certain circumstances, it's going to be really critical for what you're doing. Now, one thing I did want to bring up is we look through all this stuff. The shape collision obviously is going to get heavy, and it's also partially because we have, where are we? We have a volume breaker hiding in here somewhere. I've completely lost it. Okay, so we should have a volume breaker. Maybe it's just because it's cached right now, but we have a volume breaker in here. It's testing all the groups. It's doing quite a lot in here, but the only other big thing that pops up is the in-mesh stuff. And I'm about to get into this. I already plan to, which is why it doesn't surprise me that it actually is kind of big compared to everything else, which is like 32 kilobytes, 8 KB, they're all pretty small. This is a little bit heavier, but again, volume breaker. So in this case, what I wanted to bring up is that things are slow. They shouldn't be as slow as they are. And part of that is to do with this setup. Now, not this setup, where am I? So in the radius activator. Now this setup, I wanted to do it this way because I think it's pretty, I think it's good what we're doing. What we're doing is great, where we have a sphere, and the sphere, this could be any shape we wanted. It could be very intricate. We could have lots of spheres popping up, but it's using this to activate, and anything inside of it is going to break apart, and it's doing a lot of cool stuff. Now, because it is a sphere, we can kind of get away with using more efficient ways, because technically looking inside of a volume and saying, okay, what particles are in here constantly back and forth, even a sphere, it's pretty heavy to do that all the time. If you're doing it for one frame, fine, but this is constantly doing it. So that being said, what we can do is we could look at doing this a bit more efficiently. Rather than doing an in mesh that's checking every frame, every particle to see whether things are in here, we've got multiple ones of these set up. There are other ways to do it. So first of all, one way would actually be just to do one of this PPass AB, and then we set up a very big conditional segment saying if you're in this group and this, go to this, and we could do a lot that way, but it's still kind of limited to what we spit out. But basically right now we've got it going through a mesh, and so that particle shape, that sphere that grows, is what's controlling it. And because of that, it does get kind of slow. So what I want to do is I want to change this up a little bit where it should be a lot quicker to process, because rather than doing in mesh, we can actually do a distance. And a distance means that it's just going to check the center particle here, and based on the range. So for instance, we have a particle here. It's kind of hard to see, but if we have a particle here, based on the range, we could say anything within this range, then they all activate, rather than it being a mesh, which it's got to calculate the volume and then look inside the volume. Having a range saying, are you somewhere within this range? It's a lot lighter when it comes to calculating. So that being said, what we can do here is get rid of these in meshes, get rid of the ands. So expand these first and just get rid of the and, the in mesh. So we can keep this a lot simpler. We'll just connect these up. So it's still going to check the particle age, but the way it'll activate is we'll tell it to activate these instead. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in the, which one was it? It was the activator. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to output the size. And then I'm going to input the distance here. So bear with me for 1 second. So we look at all of these, we have a distance, and this means that the whole group 80 is not going to actually test true for anything unless it's within a certain distance, okay? And that way it's not going to like look through everything going on. It's only going to look at, okay, well, if you're close to me, then let's test. And this is a way to kind of keep things faster. Now, the cool thing is that by setting this to distance for all of these, we can then say, okay, well, what is the distance? And we have the size. So let me just turn all the stuff off for a second just to kind of keep this really quick. But basically, if we're to look at this, we have the size of the activator growing the whole time. So the size is growing as well. So rather than checking what's inside of it, we can just plug that size right in. Now, if the size wasn't big enough, we could do like an add multiply and multiply it by 10 or whatever, but the size is actually ideal. It's accurate. So what we're doing is we're activating this based on the size here is plugging into the distance, and that's choosing to activate everything. So particle age also says, okay, well, don't do it on the very first frame, but after that, it's going to activate everything. So let me just make sure the cache isn't on. So as we can see, the size is now controlling it, okay? So that's just one way we can do it. And obviously it's a little bit different now. It's a little bit more aggressive than we want. But if we go back into the analyzer, which when you have TP open, you just hit A and it should show up. I'm just guessing, but I'm going to assume that, I wish I could just do show all. I'm just going to assume that this is going to be a lot lighter. to calculate now. It's a lot faster. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind, is like already just by doing a few tweaks, things can be a lot faster for us. And that's one thing I really want to push, and I do with the live action series like LAS, is in those courses I'm not trying to do surface stuff. I'm trying to teach more core information. So a lot of the times I'm not going to just say, okay, put in these values and everything works. I want people to learn, like, forget the values I'm putting in, let's talk about how this all works, get a complete understanding so you know how to take things beyond what I just did. Because I don't want people to say, well, Alan always puts in 3.562 and it gets him the result he wants. Instead, I want you to say, okay, well, forget Alan's settings. Let me understand why Alan's putting in 3.562, and therefore I can, really do anything I want with this and get a deeper understanding. So initially saying, okay, well, now we have a sphere and everything's in the sphere is one thing, but then it's like, well, how do we replicate those results but make it much faster now? And that way we can get faster iterations out, is going to be a lot better. And there's going to be a lot of that I want to start to dive into. So let's control the radius, here. Let's control the radius here as well. So I can set up the threshold to be like 40, and that way when it's expanding, it's going to get to a set size and then stop. Okay, so again, like everything we've done, we've set up in a way that's very easy, where the size might expand, but we actually managed to cap it. Okay, so simple things like that, so that way we know that we're still only breaking that section of the building, and already it's much faster. So, okay, at this point, I just want to touch on that because obviously it's going to be a lot faster. The other couple of things I just wanted to mention, this will come into play later on, but we have our Explo. And with this, I just want to set the particle count to about 100. That way we're going to get like lots more particles coming out. So it's going to take a while to activate. What time is, like, we have 165. So right now we can see that that's the maximum that those are going to activate. Anyway, so at 165, we're going to get these spheres exploding out, and now there's 100 of them. There should be a lot more coming out, which kind of helps. So going back into the radius activator for a second, the other thing that I wanted to do is, as these explode out, you might notice in the original animation, let me just bring this up again. So when this initially breaks, it isn't really that exciting. Now, the reason for that is technically to do with the fact that we have the shape collision, and the shape collision plugs into the volume breaker. So in layman's terms, if this was a wall and this was a sphere, when it hits it, the wall then breaks apart. Okay, so there's pieces of rubble and everything that breaks apart, and that sphere technically should go through it. Now, the reason that it's not is because, okay, so there's diagram 1, there's diagram 2, so diagram 3. Technically what's going to happen is the sphere needs to hit the wall, and when it hits the wall, then it tells those pieces to break. But for that to happen, step 1, sphere hits wall. Step 2, VB, break. Sorry, I can't draw it or write today, but break. And go to a new group as well. And then step 3, whatever's going to happen. So here's the problem. The sphere hits the wall, and then it tells it to do everything. And then the next frame, it's ready. It's all set up in the new group and is ready to go. Problem is, by that stage, diagram 4, I guess, the sphere has hit the wall, and it's already repelled off. And the wall now is all broken, but there's nothing really to hit it. Okay, I know I'm going backwards here, but so that's why we get kind of like a wimpy thing where all the wall is broken apart, and then it begins to kind of fall down, but those spheres didn't really hit it. So one way to do it would be to fire out two sets of spheres. One shoots out, and then after that, after they activate it all, then another set shoots out. Or, okay, I'm just talking all theory here, okay, but kind of like that ray intersect, how we had like a particle up here, and we fire this invisible ray down, and then we position a particle here, and that triggers like all this stuff. Kind of that way, we could have the sphere fire an invisible ray. When it gets to a certain distance, it then says break the wall, and then the sphere can kind of continue moving through the wall because it's all broken. Okay, that's another way. Okay, both of those will work really well. The third option is we could just say at frame 164, let's say just before it all triggers, we could just say, okay, let's just make a radius around here and say break everything, and then those spheres are going to punch through that area. And I'm going to do that just because it's really simple. But if we're doing a more complex setup, I would say do the sphere, do the distance, and fire an invisible ray that can insert cells in the wall to break the wall, and then it pushes through. Or at least fire that invisible ray and say activate the wall, okay? And then it pushes through. Both, you know, there's so many different options we have, and I'm just looking for ones that are extremely fast rather than ones that you could do so much with, but they're going to get a lot heavier. So in this case, all I want to do is I'm going to do a p-pass AB, and I'm simply going to test the beam origin, which is on the ground. So beam origin on, and then I'm going to test the collision B1 group, wherever the heck it's hiding. There we are. Okay, and I'm just simply going to say to go into, and again, I'm kind of breaking my rules a little bit here, but I'm just going to tell it to all go into the VB1 group. Okay, so I'm just going to throw it all in there. Technically, I could split this up. In fact, this is all you need. I'm going to show you how to do this first. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to say time interval, turn this on, and then one frame before, so 164. This is the linear way to do it. We're not doing fancy procedural ways of doing it, but it's going to be fast, and that's more what I'm focusing on right now, trying to, you know, chill things out a little bit. So right now at frame 164, it's going to activate the whole group, okay? So I don't want to do that. I basically want to set up a radius for this, and we could easily just kind of estimate that by creating a sphere and saying, all right, like that's, you know, yay big, however big I want to do it. In this case, I'm simply going to say distance and do like, I don't know, let's try 175. So 175 is activating all of this. It's a little bit too much, but you know, we can make it smaller. I'm just going to keep it at 175. So it's actually activating all this. It doesn't mean it's breaking it, exploding it, or anything. It just means that all of this, when the next frame, these spheres start shooting out, these are all dynamic. They're all in VB1 group, okay? They're all in this group here now. They're green, not blue, which is VB2, which means they could still break if we want them to. So it means that now we could actually have it all explode, and it will be a lot more susceptible to that. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, technically, I'm not putting them into the right groups. They're just going to the VB1 group here, not roof, floors, pillars. And I don't really care personally at this point. I'm just like, let's just cheat a little bit, throw it in there. But if we wanted to break them up into different groups, I could say roof. I might just show the concept. I'm not going to do it, but then I could just say conditions in group, particle B, activate that. Okay, so then I could say if it's in the floor group, so collision floor, then go to that group, and then we duplicate it and do it again. So it'd say, well, if you're actually in the walls group, jump into the walls. Okay, and then this way it's going to figure out which group they were in and put them into the correct group, if that makes sense. Okay, And that can be pretty useful. In fact, I'll do it and kind of like, I don't want to scare anyone by overcomplicating this stuff. So the other thing is that right now I still need the time interval to be on, or I can do the time interval here, okay? And that way it's only going to test this P pass AB at that specific frame. Okay. So I need to duplicate this at least one more time. Forget about the pillars because we know we're not using them. And this would be the roof, I'm guessing, because it looks like the one that didn't go through. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. But all we're doing is we're telling him to go into the correct groups. So at 164 there, everything's gone into the correct group. So now they're in roof, walls, floor, and they keep their correct groups. Like I said, you don't need to do this, but this might just be a way to kind of, if you want to have maximum control for later. So let's just keep this really tight because we know what it's all doing. So we just kind of keep it compact so it doesn't look too intimidating. But that's just going to set that up where all of this now will break. So these are just a few things we're doing. First of all, it's optimized the way that we're doing the distance tests here. I added a few more particles to the explosions, and I'm also saying to activate this radius here before it breaks. And again, we can make this completely procedural, but rather than automating everything, again, like LAS, like the first term of the live action series, we go through this whole building destruction, and it's insane, and we do it completely procedural. And it's very complicated, but at the end of the day, it means that you could literally just plug in any building you want, create a few helpers to say blow up these areas, and the atmospherics, you know, the debris, the secondary debris, every single part of it automatically will update. So it's just like choose a building and it all breaks apart. Here I want to get a bit more manual and hands-on, but it's also just to kind of keep it from being too complex. Finally, one or two more things I just want to quickly do would be, let's go through our volume breakers. There's two things I want to do. I want to optimize these a little bit. Main thing is with the volume breaker, I just want to set the material IDs to 3, because remember we did these materials and I did 1, 2, 3. So I just want to make sure the face is breaking material ID 3. Okay, so pretty important. So that's just with the SC. Let's go to the VB. And same thing with the volume breaker here. Again, I just want to set this up. Let's set the raster to like 50 and 1200. Let's just optimize this a little bit. It means it's going to be bigger pieces, but I just want to speed things up a little bit, and I don't think that's really going to matter too much. Material ID of 3. And again, just scroll in, material ID 3. Needs 35%, 1200, 3. So I'm just quickly doing that because it's just going to help make things a lot faster because it's not cutting it as many times. And finally, which will require a bit of, unfortunately, we'll need to resim this. I just want to make sure our material IDs are set to 3. It's not too big a deal with the prefrag, I don't think. If it's material ID of 2, you know, that's better than 1, because 1's going to be, where is it? Let me check again. Yes, actually, yeah, we definitely want to make these material ID of 3. So we will, you know, basically we're at a point where we're on the finish line of doing our final sim. And because of that, I just want to update, you know, a few things so we can just hit the button. And this will be the last time we do, oops, sorry, just hit my screen, do any more dynamic sims here. This will be it. Plus, also, I think it's going to sim a lot faster now as well. There's another thing that I want to do. Let's turn on particle cull. So let me just make sure I've got SC off. Okay, so we just have that there, and I'm going to turn on shape collision. I'm going to turn on everything. So there's a couple things that I'm going to bring up my preview again. You might see it in here. It's at the very end, but we start to see everything begin to collapse down at the very end. And basically there's a few things that are going weird because we have gravity. As soon as they all activate, gravity turns on. So if we go to the force, this is the gravity under forces. I'm going to set a threshold and output the velocity. I'm basically going to say only apply gravity if it's moving, all right, if that makes sense. So I might have to do a math and so all I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I don't know, like let's say 2.5, something pretty low, but essentially if something gets hit, then it's going to fall. So anything that is sitting there that's static is not going to fall. It's going to just stay where it is until it gets nudged, all right? So hopefully that makes sense. It just means that if nothing is in motion, it's just going to stay unaffected, but if something is in motion, it's going to fall. And I just hooked this up wrong. That should be invert, okay? So 0 to 160, this stuff is unaffected. In fact, that's a good example, though, just to demonstrate that, is that way the gravity is on. And notice that, you know, it's only things that are being affected, like that, have motion. So if they don't have anything, I guess everything here does, but if they don't have anything, then they're not going to fall, okay? But anyway, so just to clarify, this goes into the invert, okay? So it says if it has motion and it's outside of frame 160. So the final thing, though, is at 160, that's all going to activate. We also have that explosion spheres kicking in, and they're going to break everything apart, okay? You might have seen before, I might do a preview, you might have seen before that they can be pretty explosive, which I personally don't mind. I like it being explosive. I'm cool with that. But if we wanted to limit how much this is exploding, we can easily set up a bit of a velocity cap. Okay, so again, what I'm talking about is, let's say that you have a sphere and the pieces of it break up and they shoot out really fast. Well, as soon as they're about to shoot out really fast, they're spitting out their velocity, and their velocity might say, okay, I'm 500. It's meant to be a 5. I'm 500. So what we can do is, before they even begin to move, as soon as they get that velocity assigned and they're about to shoot out, we could say, wait a minute, if you're above 500, then we want you to be 250. So that way, even if it was 1500, whatever the speed's going to be, we're going to say, nope, you're 250. And we're going to stop things from going too fast, okay? So if we wanted just to kind of do a few things like that, that are going to help cap the speed a little bit, it's pretty straightforward. I would just put velocity clamp in here, and I would just assign this to all the SC, and I would just set, a velocity here. And I'm going to set a condition, so let's output the velocity. I'm going to say if the velocity is more than 200. Okay, if it's more than 200, then we can set the speed here to 170. Okay, and now I'm going to set this to speed. So let me just recap about this for a second. Right now, any velocities that get spat out that are really fast, it's going to check them, and it's going to say, are you higher than 200? If you're faster than 200, then don't change the direction. Keep doing what it's doing. Just slow it down to 170. And it's only going to happen while it's above 200. So as soon as it changes the speed, it's good. You can even go faster again if that was the case until it gets to 200. So this is a good example here of what we currently have. And basically what happens is like these areas here are not affected, but as they get affected, in other words, like the kinetic energy travels from here to the end, it makes them fall. And even at the very end, there's pieces that linger in the air, which is fine because they're part of the structure, because the gravity didn't kick in, the velocity didn't go past 2.5. So at this point, we've got a pretty good setup. I think this whole thing is going to work out really well. It's a lot more destructive. Also, because of the dynamic cap, we don't have those pieces flying up in the sky like we did earlier. So this kind of just makes it feel a lot bigger if it's not breaking down as much, and keeps it pretty contained as well. So it's just a matter of whether we want it to be this capped or we want things to be a bit more airborne. Because obviously with this one, things are exploding in the air everywhere. It's huge. Okay, so that's just one of those things that if we want to keep it a lot more contained, like it is here, that's with the velocity threshold that we set up. And this might be a little bit too subdued. We can set the threshold to be 250, something like that. Whatever we want. So let me bring up my TP. And then 250, but then we could set it to like 220. Something like that. Just so that way it's a lot more contained so it doesn't pop. And that's a good example where you do get like one particle shoots out really fast because it gets pinched. That would be how we can kind of contain those pieces. Okay. So at this point, I mean, we've already gone through a lot, but it was more about optimizing and finalizing everything. We made the whole area activate early, so that way it'll break more. We set the velocity clamp. We made things cache quicker. So at this point, I'm going to just redo the initial prefrag, only because, so there's prefrag here, just because the material IDs, I thought I set them up, but I guess I didn't. So just set this to 3. I'm just going to recache really quick. This is pretty quick. I think it's like a minute and a half. Okay, so it's nothing. I'm just going to quickly run this cache, and then we're going to cache everything, which will be more time, but I'm also going to show ways that we can do this a bit faster as well. Okay, so I'm just going to recache this. In fact, I'm going to go a step further. I'm going to just make this 70 to 71. And I'm going to set up the name of this, because I'm about to get into this as well, the whole TPC versus TPS. Personally, I like TPS. TPC seems a bit slow. So I don't want to save anything here except for the shape. All right. So I'm just going to quickly go through this one. And I'm going to set this to not cache out anything, because it's not going to really keep the age, any of this stuff. I'm going to set this to like 400 just because I know we've been moving it up a bit. So all I'm doing is, before we cache all this, we can actually choose what channels get written out. I will do size. Size is important because we will be accessing that. Technically, age doesn't really get stored with, I will keep age on, but it doesn't really get stored or created with, I'll keep alignment. I won't worry about spin or material time. Sorry, what I was going to say is age doesn't really get stored with the particle, so object to particle. It doesn't actually create that, so we don't really need to worry about it. But all I'm doing is I'm just getting rid of any channels we don't need. I'm going to make this lightning fast. All I need is size. I'll keep age, but don't really need alignment and shape. Okay, now I'm going to say set name. I'm going to say one import geo. I'm going to save this as a, doesn't really matter, but I'm going to say a TP. when I say a TPC in this case, so import, it doesn't really matter that much, but TPS I just find to be a bit faster to read, which is counterintuitive because the whole point is it's multiple frames, so that way when it's transferring stuff over the network, it isn't like a giant 10 gigabyte cache. They're all individual caches, but I find it can be a bit slow. But TPC for this I think is fine. So now I'm just going to hit record, and what that will do is it's going to save out this one frame because it's all we're doing is 70 to 71. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so that took 1 minute 26, and now we'll go back to the full frame length. Okay, so see how it's only cached out one frame, but we can then go in here and say to hold the cache. And that way it's just reading that one cache for that one frame. So I think that can be useful times because it's a small cache that way. It's only really one frame. And that way it's just using that one frame. It's not reading the whole animation where, you know, because it's not doing anything. So that's just one way to kind of keep things. Again, I'm trying to keep things very optimized. Now that I've done that, I'm going to turn on everything except for the ball test and the particle cull. And I'm going to cache the next part of this, and we should be in a pretty good position by that point. We should have everything set up. I'm pretty sure this is going to look really good. And yeah, I'm just going to run the cache of this. Now, when I set the file name of this one, I'm going to name this TPS, because personally I still like the TPS file format, which is one big cache, rather than it being a TPC, which is a sequence. And that's just a personal preference, but I'm also going to get rid of channels that I'm not going to use. So I don't want scale, I don't want lifespan, because I just know personally I'm not going to use them. Mass, I'm not going to use. Alignment, spin, I'm not going to. If I was worried about things spinning too quick, I could use that. Material time, if I was doing something tricky with the shaders, but none of these other than like shape. In this case, oops. So again, this kind of info can be handy at times, but for me in this situation, I'm just going to, yeah, I'm not using any data channels. If I was, then I would keep this on, obviously. Most of this is fine, just alignment, age, size, velocity, shape. Those ones are critical, okay? So now it's just I'm limiting what gets written out and what gets read, and I'm just choosing that so that way it's going to be quicker. Okay, so I'm going to run the cache quickly just to have a look at what this is going to look like. We got one or two final things we're going to do at that point, and then this will be the final cache. So everything's at that point where it's going to look pretty cool. I'm going to run this, we'll take a look, and then there's just like one final thing that I want to take a look at after that. Okay, so here we can see the final sim, looks pretty cool. There's one thing I'm going to adjust, is just the friction between the pieces a little bit to keep them a bit more connected, but I'm digging that. So let's do that quickly just to get out of the way. So I'm just going to go SC, actually TP tune is probably easier. Alright, so I'm just going to get these. I'm just going to keep them fairly high friction. So let's set this to 90. I'm going to set the elasticity to 5. Alright, so nothing big. The main thing is going to be that basically when these pieces come down and hit the ground, I want to have like all the contact information stored as well. So the final cache, I want to have access to that information, so that way it's cached with it. Okay, so one thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to get my particle cull, and let's actually just move that entirely out of here. So we've got this particle cull. I want to do that because obviously then we can like you know, optimize stuff. So even though it's a cache and it's fast, this is going to be faster. So in here, you know, we've kind of, it's kind of the Wild West right now. We just got a bunch of crap in here. Let's just keep that all off or away right now. Okay. I'm gonna go a bit more specific. I'm gonna go get my SC. I'm gonna get my dumb. I'm gonna get my collision B1. And then I'm gonna set up thresholds for the sizes and stuff like that. So for instance, with this, not only, you know, I don't want to kill everything, but I do want to basically say any small pieces, let's kill them. Okay, so in this case, I could say anything 0 to 10, so it's inside of those values, to delete. And that way, as pieces, you can see here, it's kind of like, you know, any small pieces are getting eaten up. So I could duplicate that and do that for B1 down here. I could say size. And I don't think this really matters because they'll never make it into that group. But let's say I did something like that. It just means that I could say, okay, let's get rid of all the small pieces. Better yet, it's threshold 2. So let's just expose threshold 2. And now let's do a float. And I'll plug that into all these. So it just means now I have this, call it size. Set it to 20. And that way it's only big pieces are going to be here. So I'm kind of optimizing it further where I'm like, all right, I only want to see big pieces. Now, on top of that, even though it starts at 70, I'm going to set this to 160. And again, that way I don't need the pre-roll. I'm going to get right to the bit where, you know, we've got the caches and everything, so I can really mess with this. Finally, I'm also going to get rid of the VB2. Because I just want this to be really, really fast. Because the blue ones are gonna, you know, it's gonna make more particles. All right, other things I'm gonna get rid of. You know, so I'm going to town here. I'm gonna get rid of all the misc because I don't need that. And get rid of that collision explosion just because I don't like it. Okay, so. Collision explode. Now that's gone. Okay, so now we're just dealing with this. There's not much, but it means that I can get quick iterations out fast, okay? And that's what I care about. And I'm just going to set my frame length to like 210, something like that, because I didn't cache the entire thing yet, just enough of it to get the basic idea. So this is cool. It just gives me something, and I can definitely play with my cull settings more, but it just means I got some pieces to initially work with, okay? So part of my whole shape collision, I'm going to turn this off now. I'm also going to turn off that VB. So let's see how quick this works. Sure, might have to set this to 70 after all. I guess it's the downside, sorry, of deleting the misc. I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm thinking, oh yeah, cache, but I need that right now. Anyway, main point is that, you know, even just a piece like that is something that I can work with. So the main thing I want to do is I've got this whole activation system set up. And because we're at that point, we might as well just clean this up. We'll keep it all tidy. We got that volume breaker. All right. Now, what I want to do is I basically want to look at this and set up a system where I can say, based on how big something is, how heavy it is, we're going to get bits to break apart when they hit the ground, things like that. So in this case, I might want to do, let's see. I'm going to go into B1. I will have all this misc stuff. I'll keep it in here. But basically what I want to do is I want to generate, actually atmospherics. Let's call this group called collision info. And in here, I simply just want to say position born, and I can do it based on the collision position. Okay, so let's just start out really basic here. Turn off the volume breaker just to speed things up a little bit. Collision info. So what this is going to allow me is, in fact, let's just set this up to get quick results. Okay, so with forces, we have all this egg timer stuff. I'm just going to say, let's turn gravity on. Okay, so that way anything that gets activated is going to have gravity. I just got to remember to turn it back later, okay? And let's also get the particle cull. And I'll set the threshold a little bit smaller. I just want to get stuff activating. All right, that'll do. So these pieces here, technically everything is colliding with each other. So they're all generating. Finally, I'm just going to turn that mesh on so that way we're just dealing with this. Okay, so these pieces, they don't happen right away, but when they do fall, technically they're reading a collision with the ground. So because of that, they're generating information. So with my shape collision, right now I'm just saying, yeah, you know, anything goes, that's cool. Just start generating when it hits the ground. Okay, so instead what I could do is I could say only if there was a threshold, okay? Like only if it hit really hard. So for instance, I can set this up where I can do like a particle data. Collision A, because if we look at the SC, this is A, this is B. So with A, all I want to output is the velocity. I want to know how fast it's moving when that collision happens. And I could say if you're faster than 100, which is pretty likely, then turn on. And it's going to read the collision from where that point is. And right now, it just means with anything, any particles that are colliding at all of collision, of anything, it's going to generate particles. So you'll notice anything sitting on the ground, even though it's colliding, it's not going to generate anything because it's not hitting enough. Now I could go further and say only things that hit the ground. So to do that, I could say in group particle B, and then we do an AND. So just think about this for a second. I'm saying if you're in group collision ground, or any of these really, if we wanted it to collide with the rest of the structure, I could say collisions and subtree. And then if it's in any of those groups and it gets hit by something, and the velocity of particle A, in other words, the other particle, is moving fast enough, then what's going to happen is it will generate something. So here, naturally, these pieces all hit the ground, so they activate, but it's based on that velocity. So I'm just going to put this as vel. So what if we then said I only want big particles to do it? I could do another threshold, and we can output the size. We call this size. And we can put another AND. So now it's got three conditions. It's going to say if the size is at least 6 and it's moving at least 100 and it's a ground or a collision object, then it's going to spawn stuff. So that way particles hitting each other won't do anything. It's only when it hits the ground. So some big chunks are going to do it. Maybe some smaller chunks, if we had any, probably aren't. So if we go back to the particle cull, we can look at this and say, what's the size threshold that we're doing? There it is, size. So anything bigger than 12, technically. So I could set this to be 6. So we're going to have small pieces as well. It might be a bit slower. The size threshold here, we could say 12. And this means that only those pieces relatively about that size are going to show up. So now there's a lot more pieces, but none of those are big enough to cause any collision. See, so they're all hitting the ground, but they're not big enough. Now some of the bigger chunks are falling. If they hit the ground, they'll cause dust to come up. The thing is that they're not hitting the ground, they're landing on each other, so we don't really see anything. So I could get rid of the whole group restriction, and I could say, all right, just basically if you're this size and this velocity, then you can spawn particles. And I think that is going to help when these bigger chunks start to fall in a moment. Yeah, we're not really seeing too much of that. I might adjust the velocity threshold a little bit. So, you know, at that point, like, we can set up different conditions, different things can be triggering this. So we can start to see a little bit over here, but because there's so many more pieces, the velocities just aren't getting that high anymore. But now we could set up one which is going to store like ground dust, and another one could be particles that are, you know, colliding with each other. So obviously you could set the threshold down to like 8. You know, I think that's going to help, because then the smaller particles, as long as they're small enough, are going to trigger stuff. You know, so there's different things that we can set up. We can say collision floor only. You know, we can set up very specific conditions based on this number of collisions. So that way it might only create dust for the first 3 collisions, whatever we want it to do. Okay, so that's kind of like a way that we can set this up. So in this case, I'm going to say, all right, only if it collides with the ground will it generate these. And from there, what we can do is we can set up a different emitter for stuff that's colliding with each other. Okay, if that's something we want to do. But this is just a way that we can store this information, and we can store, you know, the velocity. We can store a lot of different things. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go collision info. I'm going to put 2 of these. I'm going to put col info floor. And frags. Okay, so these 2 are going to be 2 different, let me put double underscore, these 2 are going to be 2 different groups, so that way I can essentially store a lot of info based on what it's doing. Okay, so in this circumstance, I got particle data, and I got the size, velocity, and it's saying only if it collides with the ground. Okay. Now, I want to store a lot of information about like where it hit, the size of the piece that hit it, the alignment, just in case I want to do anything with this later on. So these are probably the things I want. I want speed, I want direction. So I can put direction into particle A, size into particle A, alignment into particle A, speed into particle A. So all of this information is going to be put into this particle. And from there, I get to say pistol per call, and the lifespan can be like 1 particle or whatever, like 1 frame and 0 variation. So this just means it's going to record all this information as it gets stored, and we'll put this into collision floor. Now I'm going to duplicate this. And then I'm going to say this is only for stuff that's colliding with shape collision. And again, get particle A and grab particle A for this as well. I'm going to say frags. And frags. Let's call this col info frags. Okay, and same deal. I'm just getting information from particle A because I don't care what the floor is doing. So all this information is really helpful. I might actually just put this in as well. It'll just store everything that way. And so maybe with when they're colliding with each other, I could do less. I could do like 15, maybe the sizes, you know, I could do 6, whatever I wanted, but then let's just keep this relatively compact. The whole point, however, is that we've set this up in a way where we're able to record all this information and they're going to be going to the corresponding groups. Now with collision floor, I'm going to change the color, let's say to blue. Collision frags will go like, I don't know, yellow. So when I would cache this out, it's basically going to be storing information about a lot of these collisions into a particle, and I can then pull that particle information later on to be able to control, you know, whatever I wanted from it. I can spawn lots of dust puffs, for instance. I can spawn lots of rocks hitting, whatever I wanted to do. Let's make this actually happen a bit sooner. Okay, so like right now I'm restricting the size. I'm fine with that. I don't mind it being slightly bigger sizes. I will do like 6 and 5, even though right now we're culling that. The speed, I'm going to put it to 7. These don't really move that crazily. That's the SC and that's the collisions. Yeah, that's all good. So there should be a lot more happening now, I think. Yeah, so we can see there's a lot more of these particles. Okay, so all that means is it's essentially just recording all that info in there, which we could use later on. And I could also, I assume I could probably set this up to say lifespan of 0, but I'll keep it at 1. Anyway, so that's kind of cool. It just means that we now have all the info and it'll be cached in there. The caches will get bigger because of that, but it means that now when we run this, we don't need to worry about, you know, like I'll have all the information I need to then do some really cool stuff with it. So we can turn particle cull off. I'm going to run a cache of this now, and I think that this will be the final cache. It'll have everything that we need in here. Let's just make sure that we actually set this up to be the full frame length. So this is why we have our camera. So 414, we can see up in the name there. So 414. All right, so I'm going to run a cache of this, and I think this will be in a pretty good spot. One thing before we do, let's not forget this, turn the gravity back on. So that way it's only happening at the correct time. I think that will be it. Okay, so this is the simulation as it is, and you know, I'm pretty happy with it. There's definitely things I would tweak about it, but I'm trying to turn this stuff around in like, you know, 3 days. So there's, you know, a lot more I'd like to do. One thing I was really hoping to get in here was actually making all the debris kind of spiral as it goes up, but again, just time-wise, I kind of figure we got to keep rolling with this. So as it is, looks pretty cool. I would add more friction if I had another chance to do this, but overall this is cool. One thing I'm just going to quickly mention, really important, when running at channels, these are the final ones I wrote out. I decided just in case to include the lifespan. I guess it's the only other one I added. So age and lifespan, I was just doing age before, but I just want to be safe and say lifespan as well, just in case, because even though age is the one that's going to be counting up, lifespan is technically the entire lifespan of it. It's just better to grab both. So that's just the one thing I just wanted to add in there. All right, now at this point we've cached it all out. My cache, I think it took about 32 minutes. I just ran this cache. This is a temporary cache of mine. It's only like up to 217, so it's only 8 minutes long, but the full cache is about 32 minutes. What I want to do next is I'm just going to create a secondaries group. In this secondaries, actually I'll put it at the bottom. In here, I want to put a bunch of effects. So this is going to be all the dumb particles being triggered from the dynamics. So in this case, I want to do something like rock trails, fireworks, impact rocks, stuff like that. Okay, so rock trails, I'm going to dive into this first. Let's just say create rocks, and then there's going to be like forces, and then I'm pretty sure we're going to want to like cull, let's just gonna say kill particles. Alright. So let's do this. I'm initially going to bring in my, what are we looking for? Oh yes, I could actually create a group as well. So we got secondaries, and I just want to have one called rock trail. So I'm going to say sec just so it's really obvious, but a rock trail. And let's initially just have this coming from the VB1 group. I'm going to turn on the particle cull just so this is faster. And I don't know, let's just see how this looks. So that's fine. Yeah, I mean, this is fine. So one thing I might do though is, yeah, these guys are based on size, so I'm just going to kill them off, just so we have everything going up, small and big. And so with VB1, I'm going to do a position born, and we're going to link this up. And actually, that's one thing also I want to do is I'm going to create some trails here, but in a moment, I'm going to bring in a debris asset. Okay, so this is going to be a chance for us to create some rocks and things like that that we can instance. So initially, it's going to bring in the position, and let's just send this to rock trails. Scroll down the bottom, rock trails. So what's going to happen is we just get particles being generated from everything. Okay, and there's a couple things wrong with this situation, but for now, let's set up some conditions. I'm going to initially set one up to say particle age, and also I want to set up some thresholds. So I also want to say like based on the velocity, based on the size. So let's output velocity, oops, size. All right. Let's rename one of these to size, the other one to vel. So velocity, size. All right, so we've got a few thresholds here. The other one's particle age. And we'll do some math. I just want to add some of these, so just 3. Plug these in. All right, and that's going to control this. So now it needs to fit all of this criteria. So initially, let's just say absolute. Let's give it like 5 frames and then 50, something like that. So it's going to generate trails 5 frames after they get created. The velocity, let's just say, I don't know, because they're not moving that big. So let's just say like 20 and size of like 6. Just something where it's not going to emit from the small ones. We only want like the big particles to generate. All right, so that's not working, which is fine. So I actually wanted to talk about this. So again, with LAS, one thing I talk about a lot is how to troubleshoot. Because again, people kind of get stuck and they're like, what do I do? So this is a perfect situation where I'm like, okay, this should all work, and it's not. So always what I end up doing is if something's not working, I go in, I disconnect it, and I try and do my best to get it to work on one of these first. So let's try particle age. I'm like, okay, that doesn't seem to be working. Good. I do the next one and say velocity. And velocity, I'm guessing, is going to work. Yep, great. So size. So each time now, I'm just trying to get a result. And as I went through these, size and velocity both worked. So it meant that the particle age, for whatever reason, is not working. I'm not sure why that would be. But let me just say it's reading age, lifespan, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so I'm just going to try a relative. Yeah, it's weird. Okay, I don't understand why this wouldn't be working. It's kind of odd. But in a situation like this, if there was an issue, there are workarounds for it. I'm actually not too concerned about this, but basically I can just use a good old X timer. I'm not sure why that is, because I definitely have output, lifespan, and all that good stuff. So it's kind of odd. But like I said, I'm not too concerned. For now, let's just do this. I'm just going to output these two.
I can't find the album DFDS Live in Europe Solo 2 Troubadour.
So that would be my Amazon Alexa, like Amazon Echo, for some reason thinking I'm talking to it. Cancel. I'm going to keep that in there. All right. So anyway, I'm just going to switch this to pistol shot. I just did that for a second to test it, but basically I just want to keep this on. So I think that's fine as is. So right now I just have it based on the velocity, based on the size. It means that only set particles are emitting. Okay, so I want to change the size. I could do 4, and that way it's going to emit a lot more because they're a lot smaller. I can also do less velocity as well. And the reason I have a velocity cap just means that the ones that aren't moving aren't going to create any of these trails. Okay. Now the final thing is, if we look at this, it's emitting from the center of these particles, which is kind of, not too exciting. So I actually want to emit from the position. So helpers, position, surface position, plug in the particle shape, plug in the position, and then say face, and we could say the map ID of 3, and that would be the inside faces. So it's the edges that are going to get created now. So that would be how I could emit from the actual shape of these pieces, which I think is a lot better. Okay, so that's what we got so far. We got all the debris kind of raising up in the air and then smashing down. I feel like the turbulence might be a little bit too extreme, just because, I don't like it leaving the shape too much. So that's like the one thing I might change. But overall, it's looking cool. The other thing I'll mention is that all the debris shoots down, which is awesome. But I don't want to deal with collisions for this many particles. It's not really about the particle count. It's just we're not really going to see it, I don't think. So that's the other thing, is I want to kill all these particles that go below the ground. Now I could do it where it goes into the volume, so it goes through the ground and kills it there, but we saw how that can slow things down. What I think is a lot easier is simply just to get the rocks, and I'm going to do a particle die, and I'm simply going to do a threshold, and yeah, I'll just do a 0.3, I guess. Plug the position into the 0.3, and again get the Z value, and say if it's below negative 0.01 to negative 1000, whatever, if it's inside of that range, then basically if the position is less than 0, because this is 0 along this line here, if it's anything below there, okay, then it's going to die. And so the other thing was, I just want to go into the turbulence, multiply this by 1.5, I think. So just is it a little bit more turbulent. 1.75, I don't know, I'm just throwing numbers in. So I'm going to try that again. I feel pretty good. Let me look at this one more time. I feel pretty good overall with like that layer. I think that we've got something that's working pretty well, and then it shoots down, which will kill it. So yeah, I'm going to run a preview of this again, and then we'll take a look. Okay, so this looks pretty good. It's still a little bit crazy. Towards the end, that's the one other thing that I wouldn't mind, is just continuing to have the turbulence, maybe even crank up the turbulence at the very end, just because it's so linear in the way it smashes down, which is part of the point. But I wouldn't mind maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll just keep it like that. But the whole thing just like shoots down really quick. So that's looking pretty cool. I think that's looking pretty alright. One thing I did change though, I just wanted to quickly tweak. I just set the speed to 0.5 on the rock burst. Cool. And yeah, I'll leave all this alone. I was just thinking like maybe we could technically, based on the invert here, we could crank the turbulence up, so that way as it shoots down, the turbulence gets cranked up as well, which could be kind of cool. Alright, so that's pretty much it. Just for fun, I might crank up the particle count as well, just so we can see it. I don't think we will use it per se, but let me do 10 here. I'm just going to create the particle count, take one more look, and then from there we're going to move on to doing other secondary effects. We're just going to keep building this up. Okay, so here's the result now. This is with a lot more particles. I don't think I'll use this many, but it does look cool. So we have them all trailing up and then shooting down. The only thing is that they continue to emit the whole time. So two final things and then we're done with this is I won't do that many. I'm going to keep that at 5. And I'll keep this at, I don't know, I'll do 3, which is still a fair amount. The other thing I'll do is I'm going to set up another condition on both of these. And that's simply going to be a time interval saying 0 to like 70, I guess, to 167. I don't know, something like that. So this way it's only going to emit for the duration of it. Alright, so that's pretty much it. We've got the rock trails done. And I think they look pretty cool. I'm going to turn them off now because of that. Just so we can kind of keep moving forward with this. And the next thing I think I want to focus on is going simply to be the, we could have, well, I was going to say when this stuff crashes down, we could have like lots of rocks and stuff kick up. But again, I just kind of wonder what we're going to see of that. I guess like we'll set something up and yeah, just going to see what we see. But if anything, I'm just going to have like a few large rocks kick up, things like that. That's just going to really help. Just going to give some extra interaction to it. So we'll look at that now, just having rocks when they hit the ground kick up smaller rocks. Okay, so I'm going to go through this rather quickly. I'm going to jump to, I don't know, frame 170. So this is when all the pieces are about to start crashing down. Because we got all cached, I don't need to start from frame 0. So this way we just have like stuff coming down everywhere, okay? Now, I realize like this whole thing is a giant mess. So like, I'm just going to quickly dive into this and just kind of keep it really clean. We have that initial box setup, right? So we turn that on, at least it's going to kill everything in that group. And I could easily duplicate this and say for VB1 as well. Actually, to be honest, let's just not worry about that. All I'm going to do is I'm simply, usually I structure this stuff so that way it's just easy to turn stuff on and off, but for now I'm just trying to keep, I just want to kind of go through it kind of quick. So I'm going to kill VB2. And at least that way we're just dealing with this stuff. And so the next thing that I want to do is just under impact rocks, I'm going to jump through this kind of quick. We had all this collision info stuff, so I'm just going to try bringing in some of that. So scrolling down, we have collision info floor. Now, what I'd like to do is go position born, plug that in here, but then also do a particle age. So we could just say when it's first created. So in other words, just the first frame. Hopefully it's just going to spawn some stuff. And let's create a new group, and we'll just call this impact rocks. And I'm just going to steal the rocks from here, okay? So back in here we have all this stuff. I'm just going to copy that and just blatantly steal that stuff. Paste it in here, link it up, maybe make it a little bit bigger, so say 2. But now we just have like all these additional rocks being generated, alright? I might also just change the display type to none. And alright, so position born, I'm just going to say impact rocks, pistol, perk hole, make these live forever. I'm just going to throw in some attributes really quick, stuff we've done before. So speed and direction I'm going to plug into velocity for now. So right now, just what I'm going to do, just to keep this simple, is I got this set up like lifespan 350 and restoring in 45-degree variation. Particle age, sorry, enters group, no, born, yeah, it's fine. What I'm going to do is I'm simply just going to compact all this stuff down a little bit. I'm simply going to, because there's a lot that gets generated, I guess like 1 or 2 particles hit really hard and they generate lots. So I'm just going to do what we've kind of done before, which is they're going to assign a random ID, and then that's going to decide whether they die. I'm going to play a bit of a raffle here, or a lotto, I should say. So I'm going to say between 1.5 to 2, and generate random particle values between 0 to 2. So this is going to limit the amount being created because some of these will die. So actually, other way around, I'm going to say 1.0 to 1.5, so that way only 25% actually stay. And I might up the amount. I might say 1. Or actually, let's just say I'll keep it 0 to 2, but the threshold I'm going to say 1.8. So it just lessens the likelihood that there's going to be lots around. The other thing that I'll do is same thing with the speed. I'm going to, first of all, let's randomize the speed. And actually, yeah, let's just try randomizing the speed first. I'll try that. I'm just going to do a preview of this. And I'm only going to play a couple of frames just because I don't have gravity or anything on, so I just wanted to test it out. Alright, so far it's looking alright. I want to steal gravity from inside of here. So forces. Actually, what am I doing? I'm just going to get force, copy. Cool, let's create impact rocks, forces, paste, and impact rocks. Alright, the other thing I want to do, because now we got some gravity on this, I'm also going to throw in some spin, so dynamic spin, because these are dumb particles, so we want them to spin. And I should have actually done that before as well. Make that 435. And we'll do it based on direction. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to throw it also on these rocks because we should have, sorry, in rock trails, because we should have done it here as well. Now, one thing I think is important to say is, don't do it on things that are being created. Okay, so I'm doing forces. You don't plug it in here because anything assigned here is only going to do it once on creation. It's not going to continue to do it. And spin is something that needs to continue to be driven. All right, so we got spin, force. Let's do that kill particle Z stuff again, just in case. But let's also set up the ground here to be a collision object. So I'm going to create another group. So that way if it falls through the ground, it'll get killed. But we'll also say collide. And there's a few different ways we can do this, but we can do a U deflector if we want. Just if we're doing that, we actually need to pick the node. So environment, floor. Sorry, not floor, ground. Just picking that, saying node, and then impact rocks. So go U deflector, I'm just going to set this to 0.5, variation 35, bit of chaos, which just randomizes the amount of bounciness, and friction, bit of friction. All right, surface means how much it's going to slide parallel to it. Turn that off, turn this back on. So again, I am going through this kind of quick, but you know, I'm hoping at this point you're starting to kind of get it a little bit. You know, it's a lot to take in, I realize that. So, you know, but here we can see we now have that kind of bounciness happening. It's not the same as doing a rigid body sim, but it's something. Okay. So it's kind of like confetti, but it does look cool. We're just kind of throwing something in to kind of randomize things a little bit. It's definitely pretty intense. So I think it's looking pretty neat. I'm going to turn off the cull. I'm going to do from frame 70, just because I want to, let's see, 70. I want to see everything in context, because I think this is going to look cool. So I'm going to turn everything on, and let's just take a look at this. Okay, and this is looking pretty cool. There's one thing I don't like. I'm not going to point it out. I'll let you point it out yourself. But overall, it's cool. There's definitely a lot of crazy stuff happening. There's definitely, because we're not using the ramp right now, so they kind of fall through the ramp. But everything else is looking cool. I'm digging it. It's definitely a little bit crazy. So, yeah, it wasn't quite what I was going to actually do, but I'm going to stick with it. So with the collision, that seems good. With this, I might set the bounciness low and the friction high. And I'm just going to duplicate this. And let's just do the ramp as well, so we got that. So turn on the ground, ramp, pick node, whoop, and we just pick the ramp. All right, so that's a collision object as well. All right, so we're getting there. We've got a whole lot going on now, but so far it's looking awesome. The final thing that I just want to do, and then, and I am kind of rushing at this point, but I was thinking about maybe doing fireworks shooting out of here. I might wait on that. And the reason for that is just purely because we're going to do, I didn't mention this because originally I was going to keep it a bit more tame. So I'm just going to, I'll keep it off for now. But basically there was going to be, originally it was going to be a lot simpler, but I decided, hey, let's make this violent, let's make this crazy. So now there's, I'm going to have like pyro, I'm going to have thick pyroclastic dust that you see typically in like building demolitions, things like that. I'm going to do some extra elements with this. So it's going to get a little bit more crazy. And I think I'd rather wait till we see those in context before we start dialing in things like, I call them fireworks, but essentially shooters, things like that. Like usually it's what we would do on set is we would have little effects machines that shoot out sparks everywhere, and it kind of really adds to the shot. There's lots of things like that I want to add, but I think for now we're just going to wait and we're just going to check how it's all going. But at this point, we have done so much. We're going to be doing so all the buildings. There's going to be a lot going on, but I'm digging where it's all going. And my sim times now are 27 minutes. They're pretty fast compared to the sim I did before this lesson began was 7 hours, okay? Alright, I hope you got a lot from this lesson. We're still early days here, but we're doing a lot. Like I said, stick with this, and it's not a race. And I keep saying that because I know a lot of us put that pressure on ourselves that we need to be where everyone else is. So there's still time while I get video 4 ready for you, to go back through the training. You know, make the most of this while you can, while these videos are available. I'll make sure to keep these up until at least when we get to video 8, so you've got time to catch up and make as much progress as you can. I gotta take a flight to Canada for a shoot pretty soon, but I'm gonna try and get all this training out the door, and I'll probably do the last bit of that remotely, which will be interesting to do. But I want to answer as many questions as I can, so feel free to email me. Like I said, tag me in your posts. Feel free to publish your work in progress work on Facebook. I'd love to see whatever you're doing, and I'll definitely try to respond when I can. I think this is going to be really exciting, so continue to post your work, continue to work on this stuff. I'd love to see what you're up to, but more importantly, make sure this information resonates as we go through it. Okay, I'll be back with video 4. We're going to do some really cool stuff. We're going to really start to level things up and get really destructive with the pyro and explosions and doing all the fun things that I know all of us are really excited to get into. Okay, so keep an eye out on my next email. It should be arriving shortly, and stick with this. I'll see you in the next video.